All right, ladies and gents, let's get this show on the road. I join you from my brand new office. I probably need a makeup artist because my hair's a bit frizzy. And yeah, I'm going to get some nice stuff on the wall so it's not just a white wall, but I've only been here for 2 weeks. So today we're talking about tapers. And the reason I've decided to talk about tapers is because it's quite prevalent at the minute. We're in the middle of competition season, especially for strongman. And I've wrote a few of them. However, it's not just as straightforward as reducing volume. There are things to take into account. There's different types of tapers you can do, and we're going to go into why we taper, what types of tapers we can use, the issues with a taper, and more specifically, the issues with tapering too much, and then how to actually taper. So I'm going to screen share. In fact, I can find how to do that. I think that one's the one. Hopefully my face is share sound. Do I share sound? Yes. Optimize for video sharing. Yeah, let's click that. We'll see what happens there. We'll see what happens. Oh, hang on. To share your compute audio. Oh no. What's happened? What's happened? Are we on? We're on. Right. We're sorted. uh, Here's hoping it all works just fine. So anyway, tapering is the art of reducing fatigue to basically expose increased performance. And the key message and goals are that the goal of the taper isn't to get stronger, and you see this all the time. People start tapering, and then they think they're getting stronger, and they get it a little bit wrong because of that. The goal of the taper is to actually reveal the strength you've already built. So, what is a taper? A taper is essentially a planned reduction in training stress before competition or test day. The aim is to reduce. Oh, I've done well with that fucking bullet point there, aren't I? But the aim is to reduce the accumulated fatigue that is associated with training while maintaining technical proficiency and preserving strength and power so that we arrive fresh, confident, and ready to perform. Thing to remember with a taper is, which is different to a deload, you're not building fitness during a taper. You're looking to put yourself in a position to express that fitness. Now, why do athletes get tapering wrong? Common mistakes that athletes make are trying to cram extra training in. So before the taper, they try and cram extra sessions in, they try and do extra work, extra sets, and that isn't helping them. They chase PRs in the final week of the taper. You got to make sure it's there. You got to check that it's there. That's unfortunately not how training works. Or they add extra work, not just condition, but they add extra work because they start feeling fresh, and they start to panic when training volume drops, thinking, well, I'm not going to adapt. You've already covered. The goal of the taper isn't to adapt. 3 weeks before competition, most meaningful physiological adaptations won't fully develop before the event. So anything you do 3 weeks out towards competition that is an adaptive thing, you will generally not get the full adaptation. Now, obviously, if we're talking physiological adaptations in terms of muscles, that's very true. In terms of neurological adaptations, obviously, we can get some changes, but generally it takes around about 6 weeks to ramp up. So what you'd usually do, you'd start 6 weeks out, you'd start ramping up for the first 3 weeks with normal volumes, or even the first 5 weeks with normal volumes, and then you'd run your taper. But basically, it means the question becomes what gives me the best chance of performing on the day, not how can I get fitter before then. Now, the main changes during a taper are we reduce intensity, which is best used outside of competition or in the early stages of the program, essentially a deload, or we reduce volume, which is best suited for competition taper in the late stages of a program where intensity still matters. Now, how you do that would depend on what the goal of the competition is, what type of competition is. For weightlifters, we're likely just going to reduce volume, the same for powerlifters. In terms of strongman, you may reduce intensity depending on how heavy the event is compared to your max or your capabilities. Because if you reduce intensity, that means you can keep the volume high, and it depends whether you're going to sort of whether you're classing that event as a high strength event or as an endurance event. Both are valid, but in terms of competition, volume will usually drop harder and more significantly than intensity, with heavy exposures still present, but total work being significantly lower. Now, I'm going to go through some types of tapers, and there are essentially two, and there's a couple of tapers that fit into each category. First off, we have a step taper, which is defined by normal training all the way up to competition. And then the final week, a big reduction in volume, usually at around about 60% reduction in volume. Now, the advantages of it are it's simple to implement, it works well for experienced athletes, and it creates a rapid fatigue reduction. The drawbacks are some athletes feel flat, and it can create anxiety in athletes who work well with higher training volumes. Now, the two types of taper that fall into this category are your step taper, or what we would call training cessation, where you might a step taper, the final week, the final 10 days, whatever, you would just dive bomb your volume and reduce it to around about 40% of normal. The other thing you can do is train normally all the way up to sort of like 4 or 5 days out, and then just stop training. That will be called training cessation. And that is also a style of taper, just different to the step taper, but within sort of that step taper family. The best time to use these are obviously, we've covered for experienced athletes, not for athletes who get anxiety over or enjoy sort of like high training volumes. But the best time to use this is basically when the athlete's still adapting really well. You're seeing improvements in performance from week to week, and we don't want to start tapering too far out because we're still seeing those adaptations occur. So, a way to identify whether we should use a step taper or training cessation is if the athlete is still positively adapting 6, 5, 4, and 3 weeks out. If performance is currently stable or improving, fatigue appears manageable, motivation and confidence are high, or the athlete is generally responding well to training. The next type of taper is a gradual taper, and within that, I've put a little picture here. We've got linear, we've got an exponential, slow exponential, or a fast exponential. You can see the step taper there. Training cessation would be this, and then you'll just stop. You'd likely just kind of like, so if that's normal sort of training load, what you'd see in training cessation is a line that kind of comes to maybe here, drops all the way down to there, and then you compete around about here, a complete stop of training. Now, a gradual taper is defined by a gradual decrease in training volume, and how you distribute that would depend on the athlete and what you're trying to achieve. Right here, this is a fairly sort of, it's probably somewhere between a slow exponential and a linear. A linear, you'd have maybe a 35 and a 35% drop. This is 38, 32. A slow exponential might be more like a 40 and a 30. A fast exponential might be more like 50 and 20. Now, there's no hard and fast science to this. It's very like there's rough guidelines, but it's very much an art form that depends person on person. The advantages of gradual style tapers are there's smoother transitions in training. It feels like less of a drop off training. And they're often preferred by athletes who dislike sudden changes, as I've kind of written there. And it maintains a good training rhythm. The drawbacks are it takes slightly more planning, and fatigue can linger if reductions are too conservative. Now, when you would use this is when fatigue's accumulating a little early, performance is becoming inconsistent, recovery markers are getting worse, or the athlete's carrying niggles that need addressing, or the athlete historically struggles to dissipate fatigue. Now, tapers aren't just magic. There's a problem with tapers. And as we can see here, I think I've put this in presentations before, the fitness fatigue model. In normal training, and whether you're going off short timelines or long timelines, what you'll find is as you train, your fitness goes up, but it's masked by fatigue, which also increases. Fatigue could possibly go here, to be honest, but this is the way it's shown. It could possibly track up like fitness does. Anyway, and what you'll find, because fatigue increases, performance drops, making adaptations sort of, what's the word? Meaning that adaptations kind of don't appear. Now, the problem with tapers is for those adaptations to appear, often we have to dissipate fatigue, which means fitness drops. So if you have a starting point of 90 kilos on a push press and you train and your new starting point is 100 kilos on a push press, however, fatigue's masking your fitness, you might only have 90 kilos in you until you dissipate fatigue. The problem with dissipating fatigue is while you're you're now a 100 kilo push presser, fitness is also going to drop. So once that fatigue is dissipated, fitness has dropped a little bit and performance is uncovered, it might show that you have a 95 or 97.5 kilo push press. I just pick those numbers out the air because they're easy. But you get the idea. Because fitness is built over months and years, adaptations take a while and generally increases slowly, while fatigue can build a lot faster than those adaptations, which is where the drops in performance come. And it can mask that fitness. However, it does dissipate relatively quickly. So the challenge we have is creating training and deloads and tapers at the right time so that we don't lose too much fitness. And this is one of the biggest arguments in favor of step tapers, that it maximizes the time spent in normal training while still allowing fatigue to dissipate before comp. So this is why in strongman club, in the weightlifting club, or teams, I should say, clubs don't exist anymore. And even in the Get Big, Get Strong, you'll usually see me use a step taper. I usually use the gradual tapers, the exponential style tapers, or linear tapers with one-to-one clients who I can identify as they need that. But that's why my default within one-to-one coaching and in the teams is a step taper rather than a gradual. Now, those aren't the only considerations. Athlete preference matters, as we kind of touched on earlier. Does the athlete usually feel flat after rest? Do they prefer frequent barbell exposure? Do they gain confidence from touching heavier loads? And are they naturally explosive or slower to warm up? Because the best taper isn't always the best taper in practice. Best taper on paper isn't always the best taper in practice. Some athletes like being in the gym, and I've certainly tapered in ways where I've been in the gym all the way up to the day before competition day. The best taper is the one that the athlete believes will work ultimately, because the taper is only going to uncover around about 3 to 5%. Probably it's not even 5%. I don't think. This is off the top of my head. There's research in this, but I cannot remember off the top of my head. Taper only uncovers around about 3% increase in performance. So you know, that can be 100% made up with an athlete that believes they're tapered rather than them actually being tapered, because there's also research that shows the best program is the one that the athlete believes will work rather than the one that actually works. And it's all to do with psychological factors around training and effort and confidence, which isn't part of this isn't part of this presentation. You went on a tangent there, but if you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in the comments of this presentation. Availability can also change the plan. It's not just a case of going, well, this is the type of taper we need, this is what you're doing. Different athletes have different availabilities. This could be due to work or it could be due to travel, competitions and weigh-ins and stuff like that. So you would change the final session structure. Obviously, on train cessation, you're not going to get any of this. But, I have athletes train 72, 48, even 24 hours out. Sometimes when athletes traveled, this is quite a nice session. Oh, I'll go back. This second bit, and the second bit here is quite a nice session to do after they've been weighed in and get out of the car. You train 50%, it's technique works, mobility, and you stay nice and sharp and maintain movement quality. However, some people who like to feel heavier loads before comp might work better with a last session 72, 48 hours out, called a potentiation session, with some singles that should say 80 to 85%, not 70 to 85%. My go-to would be two singles at 80%, a single at 85%, but I found bigger athletes or stronger athletes might do well with three singles at 80%, and smaller or weaker, newer athletes might do better with a single at 80, 85, and 90%. There's no hard and fast rule. You've got to take it person to person. But, the goal on the potentiation session is to create readiness without fatigue for those who like to feel their nervous system amped up. And the goal on the last session, 24 hours out, is to stay sharp and maintain movement quality for those that may need that or those who maybe had a travel. It depends, but availability can change the plan. I certainly wouldn't do both of these back to back. That's too much training. So, we've got options. Now, looking beyond the competition, not every competition is the end goal, which is what I was saying which is part of the problem with tapers. You're losing fitness, and if that's not the end goal, how do we manage that? Now, the question asked is this a major target event? Is it a qualifier? If you don't get through the qualifier, or you're not confident getting through the qualifier, and that's it at the end of it, do we need to prioritize this and then take the next competition as it is? Is this a training competition? Are we just going to train through it? In which case, train cessation might be the way to go, where we train completely normally up to 3 days before the event, just take a day off, Or is there a bigger goal coming shortly afterwards? Sometimes a full taper is appropriate, and certainly at a World Championships, I would be inclined to do something like a gradual taper, whether that would be linear or some sort of exponential taper. I can't tell you, but I'd be inclined to kind of go towards that to completely dissipate fatigue, because at that point, that competition is the only thing that matters. However, a local competition where we're a novice and we're just trying to get better every time we compete, maybe train cessation or a step taper is the way to go. Again, you take it person by person and you look at the variables and you go, this is how we're going to structure it. So yeah, the closer the next goal is, the more conservative the taper may be. It might not be a full taper, but also we might be gravitating more towards the cessation or step taper. Now, the final takeaway, as I've said, a taper is not a fixed template. It's a decision-making process that needs to balance fatigue and readiness, but also your training afterwards, as well as athlete preference, competition importance, and, well, future training goals. I skipped a bit there because I just started talking. But the best taper is the one that allows you to perform on the day. Again, you will generally, if you're a team's athlete or team's member, only see step tapers. if you want the experience of a gradual taper, or you're in a competition big enough to warrant one, and it's the end of the season, then you may well need one-to-one coaching. But yes, that is my tapering presentation. Hopefully, I've not bored you. Hopefully, I've made sense, and I'm going to stop that share right there. Now, if you have any questions, pop them in the comments in the portal. If I ever release this to YouTube, put them in the comments in the YouTube, and I will see you there.